Simcha, celebration, Simcha, Simcha, celebration of life.
Hi from me, Jared Epstein, and welcome to the last episode of this season of Simcha, a celebration of life. Summer Youth Leadership Program is a virtual program engaging young Jewish teenagers from around the world on their Jewish identity and tikkun olam, or repairing the world. Rabbi Rinat Safania tells us more about this pilot program.
Okay, go for the questions. Let's do it. SYL, Summer Youth Leadership Program. It's a youth program that developed in Israel, in Shoham. We want to do something in summer because, all the corona, and we can't go out. So we want to do something maybe to meet other people from other countries, Jews from all over the world, and discuss about, matters that in our life, in our Jewish life, in our relationship between Israel and the diaspora. And we came out with amazing program for age 15 to 18 for 5 weeks. And we had 33 youth from amazing places. We have from Uganda, South Africa, Germany, United States, Israel. That was wow. So 5 weeks of discussing together about issues that matters for us. What is it to be a leader? What it is to be upstander and not a bystander? Dilemmas. We had a lot of dilemmas of, this summer in all over the world about the epidemic and about leadership in this time, about Black Lives Matters, things that happen in this summer in all over the world, and we put it in our table to discuss about it and to see what we can, come together with.
To represent my country, it's my bag, it's a Ugandan bag, as you can see.
To live in this world, you need to see what it is that I can do as a person to make this world better. What are the things that I think should be changed? Because, if we want to do something in the world, we need to go to the youth. Because the youth, they have the energy. They still believe that we can just change the world. They still have, the fire of tikkun olam.
What gives a state, power and reality is, its citizens.
Leadership without thinking about how we can make this world better, it's not leadership. Leadership is to bring a vision for people to come with you, to hold hands all together and understand that sometimes you can do just one thing. In Hebrew you say, Lo alecha hamlacha ligmor, velo ata ben chorin lehibatel mimena. You don't have to fix all the world, but you can't just wait and see what will happen. You have to go in and see how can you improve things in your world. So we wanted this opportunity also to speak about, our relationship to the land of Israel. Another aspect of this program was the pluralistic ideas of how to see the world and how to see a Jewish world. Sometimes people just only think just about the religious part of destroying the Jewish temple, the 2 Jewish temple that had. But we discussed about, what happened before the destroyed. The destroyed was, but what happened before that? What happened, was the fight between people that everybody said, I'm the right one. I know what Judaism is. I know how it look like, and you have to be like me. And the others say the same thing. And this is what, it's called sinat chinam. You hate for nothing. You hate people just because they don't think like you. So the answer is to hear what you're thinking and to say, this is interesting. Maybe I don't think like that, but I respect you.
I have a question. So if they change it, what would they change it to?
It's a good question. This summer program was a pilot, which worked very good. And we think about, what is the next step? We think about another youth program, maybe in a couple of months, maybe when the sky will be open again, we will arrange some delegation between all these places. And because we have amazing kids now and youth, not kids, youth. I see the Jewish world as one family. We have traditional that's similar. We have a history that's similar. And sometimes you need to belong to some group. It's a very Jewish thing to be in a community. If you're not in a community, it's very hard to stay a Jewish. And it's very important to me that Jews from Israel and from all over the world will feel together. And the other thing I will say as an Israeli, I want Israelis to understand that we are not the center of the world. There are a lot of Jews out of Israel, amazing, doing more than the youth here does in order to be a Jew. And I want them to understand that and appreciate that. And I believe also to the diaspora point of view, that they will know that they always have Israel. All the academia say that the connection to Israel bring more value to your Jewish identity when you're not in Israel. So this is why it's important. And also for Israelis to be connected to people all over the world, Jewish, will bring them more value to their Jewish identity. Thank you, תודה רבה.
יאללה, להתראות כולם.
ביי. ביי. Thank you, סמדר.
The Holocaust is difficult to talk about, but it is always so important to learn about history. Professor Jonathan Weber is a British anthropologist and Jewish activist based in Krakow, Poland, and was a member of the Auschwitz Museum's International Board for over 20 years. Weber talks to us about settling in Poland and gives an insight into the well-known Auschwitz site as it was then and as it is today.
Before I moved to Poland, so many people in London said to me, how will you manage to survive there that it's all so anti-Semitic? Anti-Semitism is the main thing that concerns them. But then a lot of Jews in South Africa are very concerned about anti-Semitism. And in the United States, the content of Jewish identity seems to be an obsession with anti-Semitism. I'm sure it's a very reasonable subject, but that's all they do. They have meeting after meeting after meeting about anti-Semitism. Some priest said that. Some journalist said that. Some politician said that. What are we going to do? Blah, 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 anti-Semitism, which, of course, is for me fascinating as an anthropologist. But in terms of my personal view, makes no sense at all. If I want to live my life as according to my identity, why should I be dominated by what others think of me, especially if it's negative and uninformed and ignorant and based on stereotype? Makes no sense. Look, of course there are anti-Semites in Poland. Of course the government includes people who are, shall we say, dyed-in-the-wool anti-Semites. But at the same time, there are other people who are fascinated by the Jewish history of their country, who feel cut off from something which was part of being Polish. Jews were 30% of the population in town after town after town. Warsaw was 30% Jewish, and Krakow was 25% Jewish. But these were not just peddlers. There were educated people, doctors and lawyers and dentists and philosophers and writers and painters and artists and musicians. And Polish people would like to reconnect with that part of their identity. People invite me to speak. I've been doing project after project after project, putting memorial stones for the Jewish community in town after town, village after village, Holocaust memorial after Holocaust memorial after Holocaust memorial. I also went back to my village in Poland where my father's father was born and discovered that the synagogue had been turned into a dormitory, that the Jewish cemetery had vanished, all the tombstones had gone. Half of the Jews of the village had been shot into a pit in August 1942, but nobody in the village who knew exactly how to find that place because it was deep inside a forest. I went there, found it, discovered there was no monument there, and put up a monument. And I put up a monument in the main square of the village. In all these things, I was very careful to make it clear to the people in the village, the mayor, the Catholic priest, the teacher of the school, that I was coming back to the village to make friends with them and help them restore the history of their own village. And they were very, very pleased to work with me, and we had a very good relationship. And when we finished the restoration of the Jewish cemetery, 50% of the inhabitants of the village came to the ceremony to reconsecrate that cemetery.
In our Jewish liturgy, we say 3 times a day that God keeps his promise with those who, as it's put, sleep in the dust.
Auschwitz as a heritage site is extremely complicated. I know from my 23 years on the board of the Auschwitz Museum that we Jews have not done enough to understand that Auschwitz was a place of major martyrdom, also of others, not only Jews. About 100,000 non-Jews were murdered in Auschwitz, which is a small percentage compared with the 1 million plus Jews who were murdered in Auschwitz, but still 100,000 people is an awful lot of people. And we don't seem to focus enough on that. Listen, Holocaust survivors are people we should show the greatest respect to for all sorts of very obvious reasons. But I do not trust them as educators for today's generation, because they're out of touch, obviously, with what's been happening locally amongst non-Jewish people in the last generation. And there are 2 points of view about Auschwitz. One is that Auschwitz represents the universal dangers of state-imposed violence, the dangers of genocide which exist in many other places, many other countries, not to the same extent as Auschwitz in terms of the numbers of victims involved, but the universal problems of genocide. That's stream number 1. And stream number 2 is Auschwitz is all about the terrible things that happened to us, which has got nothing to do with universal issues. You know, of course, what will happen is a survivor will say what happened to us, and at the end, to kind of round off his talk, he will cloak it up in universalist rhetoric, so never again and how terrible it was. But in the rest of the talk, he hasn't mentioned anybody else who suffered from genocide apart from us. Of course, there are exceptional cases. Of course, I'm generalizing wildly, and I know that there are exceptions, but that's very roughly how it is. I should just perhaps add the religious approach to Auschwitz. How could God have allowed it all to happen? And this issue is a very important subject indeed, which is not explored by the Auschwitz Museum today for various reasons. And most secular Jews don't really get much significant education about the role of the rabbis, the role of traditional Jewish culture in maintaining Jewish identity during the Holocaust and maintaining Jewish identity, unfortunately, at the moment of suffering and martyrdom at the mass murder sites, including Auschwitz. And this is something which adds another layer to the whole question of Jewish heritage. Whose Jewish heritage? The religious Jewish heritage, the secular Jewish heritage, the collapse of diaspora Jewish culture, as the Zionists had said it would collapse because of anti-Semitism, and that there is no future. They said that there would be no future for diaspora Jewish life. And unfortunately, today, a lot of the Israeli youngsters are brought to Poland. 40,000, I think, last year came to educate young Israelis in the history of the Holocaust, because the Holocaust is extremely important to Israelis to understand the background to why there is a need for the State of Israel. And it's perfectly clear that there is a need for the State of Israel because of the history of pogroms and the history, in particular, of the Holocaust. So the whole question about why Auschwitz is important is also overlaid with Zionist issues. And we need to be aware that that's an extremely important input into Jewish memory of the Holocaust, and in particular Jewish memory of Auschwitz.
This week on Ask the Elders, we're asking, what is Shabbat? With Adina Roth and our youngest community members giving some great and funny answers as always. We close out the show with Choni G's song, Nispia.
A day of Jewish rest. You can't drive on Shabbat and you can't cook. You light candles. You have challah. Shabbat is a thing you eat challah and you drink wine and you say the prayers. Shabbat is Friday. Monday. Friday. Thursday. Friday. Friday.
Shabbat is the seventh day of the week, which we're told to observe in Judaism as a day of rest, a day where we don't do any work. There is a wonderful Jewish rabbi and scholar called Abraham Joshua Heschel, who wrote a book about the Sabbath called An Island in Time, where he speaks about the world of matter and space and conquering matter through kind of materialism. And he says that Shabbat takes us out of that. It invites us to relinquish the physical and move into higher dimensions of being. So traditionally, it's understood that there are two elements to Shabbat that form the whole. There's Shmirat Shabbat and Zechirat Shabbat. Shmirat Shabbat are the things that we refrain from doing on Shabbat in order to create the sacredness of the day. Zechirat Shabbat are the positive things that we do on Shabbat in order to create a different feeling on the day. We prepare our home and tidy it. We put a white tablecloth on the table. We put on our best clothes, like getting ready for a beautiful party with God. And then we bring in the Shabbat by lighting candles and blessing the wine and blessing the bread of Shabbat, which is 2 loaves of challah. And this is how the time of those 24 hours begins. And so all these laws, both the not doing and the doing, I think are trying to bring or shift our consciousness from doing to being, from relinquishing control of the world and engagement in pure materialism, and to shift our dimension to something else, which I think human beings often forget is even possible.
Ishka It's a mad, mad world and I don't know where to turn. Please won't you bring me home?
That brings us to the end of this season of Simcha, a celebration of life. As always, we'd still love to hear from you, so please send us a Facebook message at Spirit Sister Productions. From me, Jared Epstein, and the Simcha team, thank you for joining us for this season, and we look forward to sharing celebrations of life soon. Take care.